Hey everybody, welcome to this webinar. We are so excited to be here with you today. My name is Jen McMillan and I'm a part of the North Point Partner Team. And I am joined today by my two good friends from the table group, Bo and Cody. Welcome guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks, Jen. My gosh, this is gonna be so much fun. We are here today to talk about the Working Genius and specifically how that can help churches.
Cool.
So you guys have been a part of the table group for a while now. Working Genius has been out for a year-ish now. And how are you guys seeing that working specifically kind of in the church world? Where do you see it finding traction and helping churches?
You should start because before we even had this partnership, we saw some data that made us just go, oh wow, churches are really getting this.
Yeah, I mean, every day I would look at this report of like who's buying this and who's using this. And it was pretty clear out of the gate that more than 50% of the orders that we saw coming in were like churches and nonprofits. Wow. So
amazing.
More than we expected, and certainly something that we tried to lean into was like, man, there's so many leaders and churches out there in this space that are saying this is valuable to us.
Awesome.
I think it's in part because we're dealing with like, this is about people's God-given gifts and how do they bring their talents to a team to get work done. So it was really cool to see that. And then you actually used it at a church before you even jumped over to table group. So.
Yeah, I worked at North Point Ministries right here where we're filming this at Buckhead Church. Right. And early on, we've known each other for a long time. He told me about the model. And then we're like, well, that seems like something that we could really use with volunteers. Mm-hmm. And so before we even rolled it out to our staff, before you even had team maps, we started talking about this with a core group of volunteers. Yeah. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but fast forward, we've now certified, 300 people in Working Genius to be able to be facilitators and out there working with teams. And like 50 of those people are doing that with churches. They're church leaders who just see, oh my gosh, I get this. Mm-hmm. People have God-given talents. We should put them in the right seats, help teams get along better. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty cool. And you all are really at the tip of the spear. Partner team and churches who are figuring out, we want to get healthier. Mm-hmm. This is a tool that we think can help.
Yeah, it's so exciting for us to have this kind of partnership because our goal is to help churches be healthier and to help them have a greater impact in their communities. And this is just such a great way to help them do that. So let's talk about church staff specifically. Let's start there and just talk about what does it look like? How do you see churches implementing this with their church staff first?
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, so one of the ways we do this is it starts with the leader. It's really important that the leader actually understands what his or her God-given talents are. And really, this is, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it's part personality instrument and it's part productivity tool.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting because one of the things you do is you learn about, hey, what are the things that give me joy and energy? What are the parts of my job that actually fill me up and bring me alive, and how God wired me to participate on a team? Mm-hmm. And then you also find out what your working frustrations are. Right. What are the things that actually in the process of work, the machinations and activities of work that actually drain me.
Right. Yeah.
And so
when you try to do them, drain other people.
Exactly. And frustrate them. And so, so for a church team, for the leader to say, hey, I understand what my God-given gifts are, what I'm bringing to the table, what I'm fulfilled by. I know what my weaknesses are. Let me look at my team that I'm surrounded by and say, I want to know what each of their areas of genius are. One, so that I can put them in the right seat to contribute to our team. And then also let's have a vulnerable conversation about what actually frustrates us at work and what frustrates us at the job that we come to on a day-to-day basis, and maybe even make some adjustments based on that.
Yeah, as pastors, what we want to do, I think what all leaders want to do, they want to move forward, right? They're paying attention to their surroundings. So much has changed in the landscape of church and they want to move fast, but they also want to take care of their team, right? Moving too fast can lead to burnout. Moving too fast can leave people behind. And so we're managing this tension of how do we move forward without leaving people, back in the dust. And Working Genius has put language around, to your point, how innovation, how productivity can work by, I'm assuming y'all are familiar with the model, through the 6 different phases of work. And then what's so cool is for me as a leader, I know who to elevate at the different phases of work, who to really lean into their genius. And it's helped, it feels like it's a paradox, but it's helped us be able to move faster while caring for people better. So people are experiencing actually less burnout. They're being retained better. They're feeling more life and joy and fulfillment. And they're seeing this process of we're changing the future, we're changing the landscape of, church, business, culture.
Totally. And it really is sort of like if you went to any leader of any team, church or otherwise, and said, how would you like your team to perform better?
Right.
Like, how would you like to get more out of them and for them to be happier and more fulfilled doing it?
What
It's like a
leader doesn't
have
want
your
that?
cake and eat it too situation. So when you can get people in the right seats, and these are the seats that were genuinely wired by God to slide onto a team. Here's how I contribute. And then you're having great conversations about like, hey, you're great at enablement. Thank you for coming alongside and helping with that. Or, hey, I need your invention to come help us with this program or thing that we're trying to launch. So it's just it really is kind of a have your cake and eat it too situation, which I think is serving so many people.
Yeah.
Can I say 2 more things about that? We have plenty of words Jen, about all this.
Yes, bring them on.
One of the challenges anytime you're leading any team is helping the team members around you be self-aware. You know, they've got spinach in their teeth. It's easy to tell someone they have spinach in their teeth. It's another thing to say, you were just really disruptive in that meeting, or you're passive. And Working Genius has helped us have new language to be able to help coach. A lot of church leaders have young staff or staff who are figuring out their chops in leadership. And I think that's really helpful. And just like a cheat code, I'm assuming, again, some of you have taken some of this assessment and working with your team. You in 30 seconds could go do this as a leader. You could go write wonder, invention, discernment, galvanizing, enablement, tenacity, and say, all right, everybody, where did we get stuck? On our last project, our last endeavor, where did we get stuck? And just that simple question to remind us, okay, we're moving through these 6 phases of work. That's our role. Then let's address that. Do we need to bring somebody else into the fold? Does somebody else need to join this leadership team? Do we need to create more space for discernment because we're moving too fast? It's just been so helpful.
It's been incredible for our team and for all the people we've used it with.
Yeah, that's phenomenal.
Excuse me.
So, guys, you've talked a little bit about how this assessment is both kind of a personality assessment, but it's a little bit broader, different, because it impacts how people interact with one another in the workplace. So tell me about what you've seen with churches and different groups that have done this and taken this assessment. How are people actually finding their own fulfillment and joy, their purpose? How is this maybe giving language around it? How do you see this bringing life to these churches?
It's tempting when you sit in a seat like this, and we love Working Genius, to say, oh my gosh, it's changing the world of work and it's making everybody's job better. But the reality is, for any new tool or language, you do have to pause. And that can be disruptive. Here comes Sunday. Wherever you're watching, the Sunday is coming. And so to actually stop and say, wow, let's reconsider our org chart, reconsider our teams, it is work. And what like anything that's worth it, it's work. Anything that's worth it, it's a process. But what we have found is the more self-awareness fuel that you give somebody, the further, the faster, the more difference that they can make. And it's just worth it every time, isn't it?
Yeah.
To help people discover the self-awareness of where they're dragging other people down with their frustration, where they felt guilt and shame because they're trying to do something that they think they're supposed to do instead of really living in their genius. So if you're a leader and you're wrestling with that of, okay, it all sounds good and ideal, but it sounds like work, it is.
And I would even say that one of the objections you have to overcome a little bit is almost every church staff is using some version of an assessment, right? Like we all know,
We're inundated by all the different
and we love
options.
them all too. We're like Myers-Briggs and Enneagram. There's so many out there. StrengthsFinder. And what I think, if you could, because a lot of the resistance is, hey, listen, we already know our colors. I know I'm a
We have our
dolphin,
t-shirts,
whatever, whatever it is. But when you present this and say, listen, only 20% of this is about discovering, your own personality type, how you actually fit into a team. The 80% of this is a productivity tool. That's kind of what separates it from some of those other tools, is to say, this is about how work gets done. These 6 activities. So it's great to know that I have woo and that you have input or whatever it is, but what does that mean as it relates to how we get work done? And the simplicity of it, there are 6 categories.
Right.
We have 2 of them are genius, 2 of them are competencies, 2 are frustrations, and we can put people in roles that relate to the activity of getting work done. So when we talk about fulfillment and joy, it's really about being able to say, oh, it was freeing for me. It was liberating for me to go, oh, this is where I contribute to my team. This is exactly the thing that I do best that fulfills me. And so you're seeing a lot of people. We even had a number, not more than once, a pastor has reached out and said, wow, I can't believe for my entire career, I felt shame or guilt or frustration because I wasn't an inventor. And I thought something was broken inside of me, and I was
Because
looking
as
at
the
all
leader,
these
that's
other,
what I'm supposed to bring to the
exactly.
table.
That's right.
Yeah.
And like I thought something was broken because I couldn't sit down and come up with a new sermon series or something. And then to realize, man, God wired me in a way to contribute to my team in a different way. And it means that we need each other,
Right.
which is foundational in what we believe, is that God created us to be in community. And so a pastor with certain geniuses needs to lean on a staff with that can help them out.
Sure.
So
Let me get super practical. What you all are really exceptional at in the world of church is helping minimize confusion for the attendees, right? We don't use a ton of Bible-y language. We try to lower the barrier to entry so that people can be really open. Right. But for some reason, as leaders, it's a lot harder for us to do. So people show up to meetings and they don't know, is this a meeting where we're brainstorming, dreaming, or we're trying to get things done?
Right.
Or you go to your youth pastor and say, okay, you got to do your retreat. But nobody's clarified, are you supposed to reinvent how retreats are done? Or are you supposed to execute the playbook from before? So when fully leveraged, Working Genius can minimize people's frustration. Because you as the leader, we have a leader, Tim, that we know, who does this in every Outlook meeting. He says, hey, y'all are coming to this meeting. Just so you know, this is an invention discerning meeting.
Right.
So when we're done inventing and discerning, we're going to actually stop the meeting before we move to galvanizing.
Yeah.
And I know some of you aren't invention discerner people. That means that you need to come with some energy. You maybe need to be able to sit on your hands, or maybe you need to invite a key volunteer to come with you. Imagine what this looks like in volunteer training, to be able to show up and say, hey, volunteers, we actually believe that God has given you a genius.
Yeah.
So instead of just giving you 5 tasks that you need to do, we want to first help you discover your genius. Some leaders here at Buckhead Church have done this with their men's leaders to say, do you know what? A men's leader who's a wonder inventor looks really different than a men's leader who's enablement tenacity. Let's help you discover what your genius is. Now we know how to breathe life into you with opportunity. People care about our churches.
Yeah.
They want to be able to use their genius to be able to make a difference. And now you have language to know when you can pull them in, and they will love it.
That is so fantastic. I love hearing that. And you kind of have already made this jump to think about volunteers, but it's one thing to think about how something like this could maybe transform your church staff. But once that team gets up and going and is healthy, it seems like how you could take this out to the whole church is just incredible. But give me just 2 minutes of like, what does it look like practically to try to push this out to people beyond even your church team? Because I hear that and I'm like, wow, that is really aspirational and so inspiring. And
How do we
man,
do
that
it?
sounds awesome. But like, where would you start? Maybe that's the right question.
Okay, I'll give a thought, and then you probably have a better thought. My thought is the best. I worked with small group leaders for a long time, both in family ministry and adult ministries. Jen, you know this. You've done the same thing. The best type of small group leader isn't necessarily somebody with the genius of wonder or with the genius of tenacity. The best small group leader is the self-aware small group leader. The person who is growing in their genius while they're leading. They know when to sit on their hands. They know how to orchestrate the process for the group that they're leading. The best type of guest services volunteer is the self-aware volunteer. And here's what will happen. If you will invest in them growing, they will be loyal to you, right? They want to show up to serve to an environment where they're growing because, volunteering in the church, they think about it 10 minutes before they show up to church, right? Maybe 20 minutes before a small group. But that's helping them out in the workplace. It's helping them as they lead their families and in their neighborhoods as they're discovering what God put them on the planet to do in the environments and spheres of influence that they're living. Can you tell that I'm a galvanizer? From sitting here, I'm like trying to galvanize you on this thing that you already get.
I know.
This is gonna be
I'm also a galvanizer. I'm a little worried. We realize that there are other tools that are helpful. We're just excited about the way that this serves the church.
That's right. You should be in meetings with us where we try to galvanize each other to how good Working Genius is. And they're going, is there any tenacity on your team? It'd be nice if there was somebody to get something done.
Totally. No, I love that's a great question, and one that I think like is really helpful. How do we get this from our leadership team to other members of the church, even if it's volunteer staff or out into the pews in the community? I think there's a number of ways, and an interesting conversation that we haven't even totally explored is that we've done in our own personal lives, but is around like
I was hoping you'd
our
talk about
marriage.
this.
What this has done for my marriage has been phenomenal, because you take a look. If you look at a team map between you and your spouse, maximum you're covering 4 of these geniuses.
Right.
and talk about an area where you actually feel guilt and shame
And misunderstood.
is in your family unit. And so when you're starting to have a conversation with your wife, and maybe it's a marriage circle or a small group discussion or premarital counseling, to say, hey, here's how God wired us. And when you look at in fact, I do this sometimes with Bo's family. He's an inventor. And if I didn't have the right context about knowing that he's an inventor, what I tend to do is go, man, Bo told me about this road trip game that he made for his family when they drove 8 hours in the car. And I'm like, I'm a terrible dad.
Yeah,
I don't do that. I don't do that. But I realize our family doesn't have invention. I can use our gifts, which are, we both have discernment. Let's go out there and that game probably wasn't that good. No, I'm just kidding. Let's go. Let's take his game and make it better,
Right.
But just the idea that, so you could do it in that vein, is to say hey, let's take a look at our couples and say, hey, one, let's celebrate the ways God wired us.
Right.
Let's look at our family and let's not feel any guilt that, I know families that don't have any tea, and they feel all this shame, our household is, we just never seem to be able to get anything done. And we don't finish things. And so that's a certainly way. I think the volunteer conversation is a great way to say, hey, you know what we're not looking for is just someone with a pulse who wants to set up chairs.
Right.
Because that's not what they want either. They want to say, hey, they want some ability to be understood and valued and say, hey, we do need some people to set up chairs, but maybe you're an inventor. Could you look at how we're doing the setup process in general? Is there a different way that you would approach it that would, so there's a number of ways that to get it from the leadership team down into other parts of the organization.
I love that.
Can I say one more thing about that? Because I'm going to.
We already told Jen, hey, you can get a few words in here and there.
We'll see.
I've been watching our kids. My kids are 10, 8, 7, and 5. And I think we've got a pretty good handle on the working geniuses for a couple of the kids. And I'm aware of how much of their life and the school system and the way that we've just set up your life up to 18 overvalues. I love tenacity, but it really is so much about tenacity. And my son, who has very, very little tenacity, maybe less than I do, is so prone to feeling shame around that because everything rewards tenacity. What would it be like to help parents see the genius in their kids and know how to give life to them? What would it look like in our children's and family and student ministry environments to recognize the geniuses of the students around us? My daughter's a fellow inventor, and tenacity is probably a frustration. So a solution to that isn't to take away her homework, but it's to make sure I'm giving her opportunities to invent things. I just think this language is so helpful to help us know how to love each other and to clarify what we're doing. You're actually the one who taught me this. I'm an inventor galvanizer, so I clarify for my wife, Nicole, when I'm inventing and when I'm galvanizing. Because early in our marriage, she thought every one of my ideas I was trying to convince her. Then instead, what I need to do is take a breath and actually let her discern. Thank God gave me a discerner. Otherwise,
we'd be doing a lot of things.
We'd be doing a lot of bad ideas.
That's fantastic. Well, I think you brought this up a minute ago, Cody, but one of the things that I have found so much benefit from personally, but also is this idea of shame and finding freedom from that, just by having language, having this tool and that kind of thing. What would you say, it translates to families, marriages, kids, all of that. What would you say to the church leader who has his staff take this assessment and comes back and they see some major gaps on their team, or as an individual, they feel like, gosh, I don't know if I can be honest about my strengths because my role does not fit my genius, How would you coach a leader on how to create a space that's safe enough that those kinds of things can be discussed and talked about?
No, that's a great question. I think that the first thing I would say is there's not a person out there that has all 6 letters, know, and it's really important. Part of the implicit in this conversation is some vulnerability to say, hey, I'm not good at this. And you guys probably already know that I'm not good at this because you knew that
In fact, you might be the last one to find out. They all knew already.
Right. And then there's ways to, to your question about that there are these gaps on the team. What do we do with this after that has happened? Or that's come to light is, the leader should go first and talk about hey, here are my strengths, here are my weaknesses. I want you guys to know that. there might be a situation where you have a gap on a team, or let's say you don't even have a gap, that someone is represented there, but their role doesn't allow them to participate in that. Like, let's say you have an inventor, but they're, running the front of house at the church or something like that. They're redefining people's roles, giving them opportunities to speak into their genius. In some ways, what it does is it makes job what's the word I'm looking for? The description's a little amorphous. It's like, hey, yeah, I know that it eliminates silos in a way that's like, hey, you have this God-given talent. Yeah. We'd love to borrow it over here. So first I'd look and say, is this a real gap? Do we have other people that can actually fill this? And let's be honest, I understand the reality is like, we can't always just hire someone and fill this role. Yeah. The first thing I do is say, let's borrow someone if we can. Let's go out and find a volunteer or even a vendor that could fill that gap if we needed to. And then I would, we mentioned this earlier, is the idea of the last thing I would do is put someone in there as their competency to say like, hey, you know what? Right. I know this isn't your genius, but for a little while, would you mind filling this void that we have? That can be a Band-Aid, a temporary Band-Aid. But what tends to happen on teams is you're pretty good at it, and then we rely on you to do that, and then you get resentful. Exactly.
Totally. And as the leader, I don't have to deal with it. Thank God they're doing it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's a little dangerous to say, hey, as long as we're aware and we're like, hey, we're going to ask you to do this it's a short term. Yeah. We're plugging a hole here.
6 weeks. We're going to give it
And we're not going to overburden you with this, and we're not going to get stagnant about finding someone to do this role for you.
That's good.
I think there's leaders who have been frustrated and maybe have been feeling burned out for a while, that this tool might give you some language around that. Maybe you're in a guest services role or some kind of role that you need to be a galvanizer, and galvanizing is I don't think all guest services need to have galvanizer, but you're in a role where it's implicitly assumed we need you to be a galvanizer, and it's draining you. And this is, it's easy to say, it's a lot harder to do. I would hope that person isn't going to spend the rest of their career cheating their genius and being frustrated, and can have the honest conversations with a close circle of people to say, you know what, I've been guilty of this in the past, to try to pursue, promotion and not really to pursue calling. And what if instead we said, what if joy is possible? Fulfillment is possible. Yeah. And if you feel like enablement and tenacity are more lower totem pole roles, the reality is that, we are the ones who preach about this on Sunday, that every part of the body is valuable. And I think what so often happens, Jen, is we coast on our genius, and we don't really take time to invest in our genius and use our genius to invest in other people. Wow. So it's a great opportunity to come alongside people you care about and say, hey, are you finding joy and fulfillment in your work? Is this as close a one-to-one relationship as you can have with who God made you to be? Wow. And let's do that for each other. Totally. It's hard. It's scary, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that oftentimes too, you look at the expectations, like in the corporate world or in the church world, it's like, oh, if I'm call it the lead pastor, the XP, the CEO, the COO, I need to be this person. I have to be a galvanizer, or I have to be a finisher, or I have to do this. Yep. There's so many things that we, one of the interesting things is when people fill out the assessment, the most common error is people filling it out based on what they're required to do at their job,
and not what brings their job description.
Yeah, not what brings them joy or energy. Right. And so there are a lot of leaders out there who think I have to be all 6 letters. And in their attempt to be all 6 letters, they get tired, frustrated, burned out, bitter, jaded, worse.
If you're doing that for yourself, everybody around you thinks, oh, that's what we're supposed to do. Be suffering servants, trying to do everything that makes us miserable.
Totally.
And you're, again, the one who taught me this. I don't really have anything original to say. I just quote Cody. Is, a youth pastor, if you're looking for a youth pastor in your team, or a children's ministry director, or communications director, whatever. A youth pastor who has the geniuses of enablement, tenacity, is a very different kind of youth pastor that has the geniuses of invention and discernment. And what you got to do as a church is take a step back and say, where are we as a church?
What do we need?
What do we need on our team? What do we need for this youth ministry? Yep. Where are we? Are we 25 years in and it's time to go reinvent and discern? Or are we 4 years in and we have a plan and we just need some momentum? We need a galvanizing enablement type person. Right. And the clearer you can be about that, the happier the people around you are going to be. And the more lives you're going to impact. You're not going to be faced with turnover and exhaustion and frustration. And
Totally.
Yeah, that's so great. Man, this has been such a rich conversation. I'm so grateful we're getting to talk about this. But as we wrap up, I'd love to just know if you were sitting across from a church leader and having this conversation with them, and they were on the fence about whether or not it was worth the investment or the time and energy that it takes to really implement this, what would you say to them? What encouragement would you give to give Working Genius a try, or really just to invest in their staff and their church in this way?
I think it's interesting. Conceptually, I think people are motivated by reward or fear, or pain.
Yep.
And so I would always start with, hey, listen, imagine a church staff that's like vibrant, that people are in the right seats, that they're loving their work. That's the best way. Like, hey, if you can get them there just by that, way to go. And if that doesn't work, you might go like, hey, I bet there's a lot of pain points on this team that if you could solve those, is that worth it for you? And then ultimately, one of the things I would like, the reason I love being a part of this conversation is we're in a really critical time in society where churches need to be the healthiest organizations in our communities, where we need teams that are functioning well together to bring people to Jesus. And more and more we're seeing that leaders, especially church leaders, this conversation around burnout is so prevalent. And I think Working Genius gives us this really fresh perspective about what burnout is about. Because when we're talking about joy and energy, the things that fill you up, for far too long, we thought about burnout as it relates to the amount of work that you do.
Right.
So when someone says like, hey, I'm going to take a sabbatical, they're like, I'm going to do nothing for 2 months. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to feel re-energized.
Not gonna work.
But that's not how we get fueled up. God wired us to be able to do things. So it's interesting. You can have someone who's 30 hours a week that's working in their working frustration and feel burned out.
Totally.
But you can have someone who's 60 hours a week working in their area of genius primarily, and they're alive and well, and they're thriving. And so I even had a conversation with a pastor friend of mine who was going on sabbatical. And one of the clarifying things was like saying, well, what are you going to do on sabbatical? And he's like, well, I thought I was going to do nothing or relax or whatever. And I was like, no, you're a wonder inventor. It would be great for you to feel like you could invent things that you didn't then have to operationalize in the church. I bet that'd be really life-giving for you. And so I think, what's the thing? I mean, there's so much there to motivate a pastor, leader, team to say, hey, the rewards are great. Hey, these pain points can go away, the friction. And hey, we're going to have a lot fewer leaders and pastors who are needing a break or feeling like, I'm at my wit's end and I don't know if I can do this anymore. And that alone, if only a few pastors of these churches experience an uptick in their fulfillment doing the thing that God called them to, that alone is worth it.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Cool. Gosh, there's so much to say. The thing I'm sitting here thinking about is actually using Working Genius is vulnerable. And I would say if you're not, as the leader, willing to be vulnerable, you shouldn't do it. Because it's going to create an environment where other people are it's going to be vulnerable. Their frustration is going to be on display. Yeah. And if you're not willing to enter the danger and be the first one to say, I'll give you an example for me. I'm an inventor galvanizer. Discernment is a competency for me, but the more leadership I have, the more discernment I actually need around me.
Yeah.
Because a lot of leadership is saying yes and no.
Right.
So sitting in front of my team and acknowledging that's kind of painful. A pastor should have discernment, right? It's the most spiritual sounding word. But if you discount that, you're just going to close up a wound. You know what I mean? You're going to put a scab over something that really could have created an opportunity to be trusting, create a beautiful dynamic with your team. So it's courageous work. It's worth it. And the people around you will be so grateful when you're able to go first. But leaders, we got to go first. Yeah. Be vulnerable.
Man, thank you guys so much. This has been such rich conversation. So grateful to have you here with us today.
Yeah.
And we're so glad that you guys chose to join us for this webinar. Please stick around. We're going to have some Q&A, and we can't wait to hear from you about your thoughts regarding the Working Genius.